Welcome to Great Minds with Lost&Found, the podcast that connects people and reimagines systems to improve mental health for youth and young adults. I'm your host, Joel Kaskinen. Lost&Found is a comprehensive nonprofit organization that aims to do more to eliminate suicide for youth and young adults in the United States. Now that you know who we are and what we're all about, let's get to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to Great Minds with Lost&Found. I'm your host, Joel Kaskinen, and I am here with our friend Brad Hearst. It's Hearst, right?
Yep, it is.
Okay, great.
Good job. Yeah, you nailed it.
I was like, did I say it correctly?
Yep.
Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We have you on for a plethora of reasons today. We're excited for, a lot of stuff that's happening as we have began a new and beautiful partnership with our two organizations. So would you just give a brief introduction to who you are, the work that you do, and the new partnership that you have with us?
Sure. My name is Brad Hearst, as you mentioned. I am the founder of Survivors Joining for Hope. We're a nonprofit organization that helps with families that have lost someone by suicide. So we help with the financial support, some of the emotional support, and really we were founded after my brother passed away about actually 9 years ago yesterday. So, but founded after his passing. He was active duty in the military, and we had some assistance from, they're called casualty assistance officers, who came to our home and provided us a lot of support when it came to planning the funeral, the financial piece, and really kind of led us through that initial grief that you kind of go through when you lose someone by suicide. And so the whole mission was founded in his memory, and the organization brought in the pieces that the casualty assistance officers provided. So that was kind of our initial goal, and it's grown over the last 7 years. And now we have the pleasure of collaborating and merging and becoming a piece of Lost&Found, and we're very excited about that. So
Heck yeah.
Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, so we are merging. The official acquisition goes live July 1. So we're thrilled to have you on, not only as a new partner and as a new wing in a program under us, but also because the work that you do really does help both in the prevention and in the postvention space. And so I want to dive into that. As you know, we are currently exploring the CDC's 7 strategies for suicide prevention. One of those is economic support and development. So kind of talk us through what that looks like from your perspective as the founder of Survivors Joining for Hope and the last 7 years of work that you've been doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest challenge that I found was, well, initially when I started the nonprofit, I was hoping not to duplicate any services, and digging in a little bit further, we found that families really didn't have that financial support. There was a lot of work in the prevention care area and a lot of funding going there, but there just wasn't anything to really help a family when they lose someone by suicide. The life insurance from a perspective of financial support a lot of times has different pieces within it that would not cover a passing by death by suicide. So really kind of wanted to bring that piece to the families and help them initially with just the overall burial expense, memorial markers. A lot of the families we met with, you'd be surprised, just didn't have the funding to even buy a memorial marker to go to honor their lost loved ones. So, and we talk about going through grief, I think that having a place to go and meet and be with that person is important. And when there's nothing there to commemorate, memorialize, or bring a legacy to, it makes it difficult. So our initial goal was simply to bring funding to those families, help them with the memorial markers, with the funeral expenses, and it grew from there. It went into things that you have that there's a little bit tougher conversation around, like biohazard cleanup is a tough. When a firearm's used, it is a challenge to clean up, and families need help with that restoration work. And we kind of took that further into, sometimes people need help with estate planning and whatnot. So it kind of grew just exponentially. And I think the biggest thing we found initially was just that there was nothing. There really wasn't anything. So when you talk about not duplicating organizations, we kind of found one that was a niche for us. And so that was our biggest goal off the start, was just simply bringing those economic resources into the community and allowing families to find this and utilize this resource for themselves. So it was exciting, and then it's grown into support groups and meeting families one-on-one and providing grief counseling and all that. So it's interesting the way it's gone, and I think with the partnership with Lost&Found is going to be a pretty big key piece to kind of growing it further into the future.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, because that's really honorable work. On the prevention side of things that we do, and from my own perspective as a survivor of suicide loss, just like you, you know, we've seen the back end and
Right.
the, you know, front end of, you know, what the impact of that looks like when someone dies by suicide. And so I just want to say thank you for
Yeah.
the work that you're doing. And again, that's part of the reason why we're so excited
Right.
to have you joining forces with us, is because it enhances and expands our scope
Yep.
for both of our organizations and allows us to do more, which is
Right.
the heart of the mission of what we're both doing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah. So thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for doing the work. And we just appreciate you doing this honorable work. But I want to jump into the economic support structures a little bit further. Obviously, that's a big piece of what you all do. I want to start by just kind of speaking into existence the kind of concept that there is no silver bullet per se when it comes to suicide. Suicide is caused by many factors, and suicide prevention is comprehensive in its approach. And so we obviously have to strengthen a lot of factors and supports. And so one of that is economics and financial stability. So based on that evidence and the CDC the CDC has provided, and some guidance that has come out just in other areas of research and development, kind of walk us through what that looks like a little bit further from just the work that you've done, as well as, you know, other things that you've seen done in that space.
Yeah, I think from an economic perspective, it's interesting to look at kind of just where things are kind of taking place at. It's hard to kind of segment it to a specific kind of just income base. It affects everybody. Unfortunately, there isn't anything, but there are key factors that can lead to make, you know, more stressful situations. It can be, you know, come down to, you know, whether there's funding for proper housing, you know, even just food, kind of, and proper safe housing, I think is a big piece. You know, making sure that families, you know, are able to get the education necessary. I think there's a lot of different factors that go into it when you think about it from an economic perspective on what can kind of lead to the overall stress and kind of just be another drop in the cup of that person's kind of build up to, you know, a suicide attempt or passing away by suicide. It's never just one cause that someone passes away from. It's usually, you know, a constant build up. And I think a lot of it does come down to economics, and you look at kind of the financial situation, education, housing. There's a lot of different directions you can take it. And I think when we've kind of looked back on the families that we've helped, it's been a pretty wide variety. I think specifically when you think about the youth, I think that's where we see a lot of different challenges, because it's, you know, are they coming from a divorced family? Is it, you know, are there challenges in the home? Is it an abusive family? There's a lot of different perspectives to take into play. And unfortunately, it's never just, again, one factor. And I think the most common thing that we see is just not necessarily low income, but there isn't enough time to really build that base as a family and provide that emotional support within. The children are often kind of doing life on their own a little bit. They're left, you know, maybe in a conversation to where they don't have that emotional support. Sometimes eating habits, it sounds silly, but if you don't have a good meal, that can create challenges as well. And as you kind of peel back the layers of the onion, you kind of find more and more things just from an overall perspective economically that are impacting these families we work with. But unfortunately, it's hard to pin down one targeted area that from our own specific work that has led people to attempt or pass away by suicide as far as the families we help. But so it's kind of the overall kind of perspective of what we've seen. I think that when I look into more or less the overall financial piece, I think is just, you got to kind of consider, are they able to get that education and grow their knowledge and understand just a good way of communicating? And unfortunately, I think that's a struggle for a lot of families right now. So and COVID created a whole new ball of wax with that situation. So.
Absolutely. Now, I guess I want to explore that a little bit further.
Yep.
What are the impacts or effects of COVID? Obviously, it's impacted our overall economy in the United States, in the global community that we live in, you know, but as far as that goes to and relates to suicide prevention, postvention, economic support and assistance, how has that taken shape for you?
Sure. I think our biggest challenge is the disconnection. We went through a year of basically not seeing anyone, not communicating. Yeah. If you're an extrovert, it was probably extra challenging. An introvert, maybe you enjoyed it a little bit. But I think specifically we found that there is a disconnection. Now, you weren't able to get out, be outside as much. I mean, just some vitamin D can help, boost your mood a little bit. And I think we saw an increase in the overall challenges in the mental health sector. I think, as you look at social media, that started to play into it too. That's another piece you have to kind of consider during COVID, because it brought two things together. We were able to communicate more effective virtually, but I think you lose that bond that kind of comes when you're face to face, and just the emotional stress. COVID brought on financial challenges, emotional challenges. Economically, it was a huge factor. Health wise, you're now dealing with the stress of COVID. I think just the fear of it created a lot of challenges from a mental health perspective. And on top of that, like you have families, lots of people that were just struggling in the community to try to find a way to make things work. And saw a fluctuation. If you go look at some of the EAP programs out there, they themselves saw a fluctuation of utilization during that time frame. And we pivoted a little bit to a virtual platform to try to bring the support groups, because part of COVID meant your support groups weren't getting together. You couldn't meet as a large group. Social distancing sometimes in support groups doesn't work out. So we tried to pivot to a virtual approach with our support group at that time. And unfortunately, for us specifically, the virtual platform wasn't as effective. We didn't see the attendance that we normally saw. So now you have people that you normally communicate with that are struggling with mental health no longer present. I mean, you don't know where they're at, what they're doing. And I think you probably saw that in the schools a little bit too, where the students that usually come to school to get their one meal a day are now gone. They're not getting that meal a day. You don't know what they're doing. So that created challenges amongst the youth too, I think. So COVID brought so many just different factors into it that challenged everyone from a mental health perspective. It was almost overwhelming. And I think we're starting to kind of obviously get out of that and bring things back. So there were positives to it. I think it did create a lot of virtual options for people, but those necessarily aren't as effective as we had hoped they would be.
Yeah, and that accessibility is so different, like when we're isolated at home, who knows if we have Wi-Fi or good Wi-Fi, good enough Wi-Fi to even, do virtual meetings and support groups and things like that. And even if you do have that, maybe you're at a home that you can't turn on the screen because it's messy, or you're in a one-bedroom home with your family, or what have you,
Right.
So I think that there's so many different factors when it comes to accessibility, to, assistance and support. And I don't think we're quite out of the woods with COVID yet, but I definitely think that we are moving forward, and hopefully we can get back into this state of we're all meeting again, and we can, go out and socialize again, and we can get outside and have some vitamin D, and, definitely.
I think Zoom fatigue was real too.
My God, absolutely.
Yeah, I think people just got exhausted with it. And you mentioned during our support groups, we did see times where people were challenged to find a spot in their home where they could communicate effectively and kind of have that unbiased, because that's the point of a support group, is to have that kind of ability to kind of just decompress, share your feelings, and not feel judged. And not having that space is a great point you brought up, is not having that space to really be vulnerable was lost sometimes with families during COVID. So that's a good point to bring up.
As a parent, you don't want to say certain things in front of your kid, or as a kid, you don't want to say certain things in front of your parents, and, maybe siblings, or maybe there is guilt and shame associated with things. And so I think that's a really, really good point that you just brought up. But yeah, I think it's interesting, but I think we're hopefully moving forward, and
let's hope.
We'll be able to, enhance some programs and be able to provide the assistance, especially with our increased partnership.
Right.
I think hopefully that will help us out, both of us out. So
effective, yeah. Better as a team, I think.
Absolutely. They say teamwork makes the dream work.
It does.
As cheesy as that sounds. Anyway, moving forward a bit here, we kind of unpacked this a little bit already, but the connection between economic instability and suicide.
Yep.
Do you have any data that goes to support that, or show in your research and just in your work?
Yep. I think as far as specific data to quote at this point, I don't necessarily have a drawn out list of things to kind of quote out, but we have definitely seen a correlation to lower income families having challenges. I think a lot of times you see it's a single parent family. You have maybe multiple kids in the house living off one income. I think from a parenting perspective, that becomes challenging. Financially becomes challenging, and there's a little bit of, it's hard to say neglect when you're coming from a one-parent home, but the children don't necessarily have that emotional support. And so I think as you look at it, there's lots of different factors that kind of come into that. There's some challenges too around, individuals that grew up without parents. You think about the adoption agencies and people that have, kind of transition from there to living on their own. And I think we've seen some correlation with people coming out of adoption agencies and struggling with mental health because they just I mean, at that point, all support factors have been removed, which we saw a few families, individuals from that perspective where, they grew up on their own, they had no other support, and they had a hard time communicating.
Yep.
And I think with that kind of lack of financial support and stability initially, and the lack of kind of structure from a family perspective, it makes communication difficult. And I think communication when it comes to mental health and grief and just addressing your own well-being is important. And having that lack of communication or, kind of that old mindset too, where they came from a family that, go back 15, 20, 30 years, it's you kind of suck it up and deal with it. I think there's becoming a transition as far as kind of the conversation goes, which I think, podcasts like yours are helping to transition that conversation a little bit. And as we kind of explore that, I think that's, as we start to see things kind of progress, things are getting better, but economically, it was just, we saw a lot of times where it was a single family home that was kind of struggling to get by. I mean, I think that just created lots of challenges for people individually. So statistics wise, I apologize. I don't have any.
I mean, that's okay. I just, even anecdotal, anecdotal statistics are great. So the points that you just shared are exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I think that brings me to the next point that I really kind of want to dive into was this point about the foster care system or the adoption system. The whole purpose of the Great Minds podcast is to connect people so that way we can reimagine systems that are, that we are all part of.
Right.
So when it comes to systems like the adoption system or the foster care system, where those support structures aren't always fully there.
No.
We have work to do in those areas.
We do.
So in terms of economic support and assistance for those kind of specific areas, is there improvements that you see that we could make just as people that work in this space, or what kind of improvements can we make politically or legislatively or culturally? Sure. I mean, there's things there, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you look at a foster care system, there's challenges. It's hard to say that there's any one challenge. I think there's just so many challenges to the point you have a limited staff supporting a large group of people. I mean, it's kind of, you look at a daycare, it's probably a similar example.
Sure.
You have two kind of primary leaders trying to guide 40 some plus in children or youth that are going through that. My brother came from adoption. So my brother was adopted from an orphanage out of Russia. He was from Moscow.
Okay.
And he spent his life alone until he was 11. And moving overseas to a country, he didn't speak any English. But as he got older, we were able to kind of work on communication and build our relationship. And I think the biggest challenge that from conversations with him was just he was on his own. I mean, he was able to ride behind trolley cars to get around town. He didn't have any money. The meals he was given, 2 a day. Not nutritious meals. It's very low quality food because the funding is limited. So I think any additional funding that can be given to the foster care system and supporting families, I think making the adoption process easier. I have an adopted son myself, and I think just even that adoption process is a challenge. And if we can get these families into homes and not be so strict on the structure and be a little more open to that, I think if we can get these families in a way to where it's a healthy home, you're going to have a better chance of giving them a more successful life and a better well-being long term. So I think that I would love to see the cost of adoption come down. I think. Oh
my God, absolutely.
Yeah, I think just minimally you're $20,000-$30,000 in if you can get something locally. I think when you think about the native population, the adoption is a challenging process there as you work through their legal system and political system. So I think the more we can open up the doors and open up the conversation and make things more smooth and more convenient and more seamless, I think we can make a bigger impact, specifically for the foster care system and those individuals that are growing up kind of alone and that don't have that support. So I think that'd be a fantastic place to start. So there's just so many places in that area right now that it'd be hard to kind of just pick one. But I think just cost and efficiency, I think, are important, because it's, even for my own son, it was, my wife's biological son, I adopted him, and that process took nearly 1.5 years to complete. So it's not ever a quick process, and that should be one of the more smoother ones, you would think, and it still took a long time. So lots of challenges out there that can be addressed from that system.
Yeah, as someone who grew up not in that world but connected to that world,
Yep.
both my childhood best friends, their families
Okay.
fostered, and then ended up adopting. And so I, from a very young age, knew that that was something that I wanted to do just because I saw the impact of
Yeah.
it. And so for me, that's something that I've always looked at was like the cost and the efficiency and the effectiveness of
Right.
like essentially my best friend's siblings.
Right.
You know, it was tough for all of them. And so hearing your perspective as
Right.
you have experienced it much more so than
Sure.
I have, like it's those points, it just drives it home, you know, like
Right.
we have work to do to make
I
some
agree.
changes. And if we can be the catalysts to make those changes, so that way we can keep people alive and
Right.
we can provide them a sense of well-being and a sense of belonging and a sense of financial security, like let's do it.
Right. Well, and I think as you think about the LGBTQ plus community, I think that's another area where we should open up the doors for adoption. Like we make it because of our cultural perspectives or our heritage. We often don't open doors that should be. And you can't tell me those families wouldn't be better off in that scenario versus being on their own. I think that's an area that has to be addressed, and I think it needs to be more efficient and less restrictive. I mean, that's just an easy place to start where I think it should
Yeah.
just be done. Like
Yep.
it shouldn't be a complicated process.
And it honestly shouldn't even be a conversation
Right,
at this
exactly.
point. Like,
No, I completely agree. It shouldn't be.
yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah, I don't want to spend a ton of time here.
No, you're
but
okay.
I think it's
We could go down a
like,
rabbit hole.
Yeah, we really could, but I just think it's so important that like, you know, we shed some light there just because
Right.
it's something that we both have personal experiences in.
Right.
Obviously, especially that we both work in the world of suicide prevention and postvention,
Yep.
like, and that's a direct correlation and causation. You know, I
Exactly.
think we have to be sharing these stories.
Yep,
So
I agree.
yeah. Anyway, moving forward, you know, tying things back to suicide prevention and postvention, but the connection between economic instability and suicide relate to young people, obviously, but especially who, you know, maybe aren't in their careers yet or are
Yes.
just starting out, that economic instability is greater. And
Right.
so therefore there's a higher risk.
Right.
You know, I think back to I just started my job a year ago and I was unemployed for 9 months prior because I had left a toxic workplace environment. I also did so during the heart of the pandemic and, you know, like just getting back onto my feet as a 28-year-old, you know,
Right.
like that was tough. But I think about people who are younger than me entering the world and the workforce today in an economy that is not doing very well and who have, you know, been privy to a lot of tough experiences.
Right.
You know, young people today have experienced warfare and gun violence and hate and prejudice. Like,
Yep.
and now they're living in an economic recession.
Yeah.
It's just,
Pandemic.
it's so tough.
Yeah.
So how do we move forward and provide our younger generations, our future generations, a greater system of support?
Right. I think it's going to start with maybe career pathing. I mean, you mentioned not knowing or kind of not being able to find a career. I think as the world's evolving, I think we need to start looking at education and career pathing a little bit differently. We've taken a very traditional route with it, and I think that route worked for a long time, but things are changing. I think, obviously, you know, student loans are extremely expensive, and I think going to college obviously is certainly extremely valuable. But there are situations where, you know, college isn't a good. A tech school might be a good scenario, or a certification might be a good scenario. I don't think everyone is necessarily meant to go to college, but there shouldn't be any shame around that either.
Right.
I think there should be, you know, you find your path and you understand where you're going, and there's nothing wrong with that, and you can change that later. I mean, I think about my student debt that I had, and it was daunting when you get out, and then if you can't find a career, that stress kind of builds on top of that, and you kind of keep snowballing. The longer you go without a career, you start questioning your choices, and then maybe you take a job that you end up getting stuck in. You mentioned a toxic culture. I think it can all snowball, and I think that if we can set people up to be more successful and kind of step back a little bit and look at the world differently, I think it's, like I said, college isn't for everyone, tech school isn't for everyone, a certification may not be, but if you can find an area that fits your passion, I think that's going to be important, because going to college is stressful. I mean, it's stressful for anybody. It's not an easy process. Going to for a 4-year degree and maybe going further on beyond that, that's time, that's financial, it's stress. If you end up committing and then not going all the way, not getting through to graduation, I mean, now you have student loan debt, no education. and maybe no job.
Yeah.
So
Well, and actually, those people are at even greater risk,
Right.
because they don't have a degree and or a job to help out with the
Right.
financial assistance. And actually, I used to work in higher education, so I've seen these numbers.
Okay.
Those people are actually more at risk of suicide too, and that's a population we don't talk about a lot
No.
because, I mean, they typically come from privilege or they have access to things, and
Right.
so they're not thought about. But
No.
when they leave higher education or what have you, and they don't have a job or a degree, like that sets them back.
Right. I completely agree. I think not that there should be an interview process 100% to start college, but I mean, I think you need to sit down and kind of have, I think maybe, what I would like, this doesn't sound a little silly, but I think for my own children, I would like them to take, 4 years after high school and just do nothing. Like
Yeah.
figure out what you enjoy, take some time to yourself, figure out who you are. I'd almost rather give them the money to invest in travel initially, kind of go explore the world, kind of understand multiple cultures, become more worldly, and then come back and start college. I think at that point, just because it gives you a better perspective, you can understand. I think it's all perspective a little bit too. As we look outside, if you look at other countries too, poverty is different amongst each country, and if you can have that understanding and that appreciation, it can maybe help with your perspective within choosing your kind of career and the college that's best for you and what you want to achieve. And I think just thinking about our mindset around the education system, I think will be kind of key to the future. I think specifically, when you look at the kind of population as they step away and if they've gone through 2 to 3 years of college, that it's not necessarily grief, but that guilt, maybe that shame is overwhelming, I think, for those students. And as they try to address that, if they have to move back in at home with their parents and they don't have the place of their own, you're feeling, your self-worth, I think, is very important. You have to, how you view yourself and interpret yourself as an individual ultimately is very important to your overall value. And if you go through that and experience that, and they're not being, once they leave college, I don't think there's any follow through with them at that point. So it's all on the family or them as individuals to support themselves. And if we can make people, have students be more successful, create more, I guess, successful graduates and get people to completion, I think, more efficiently, I think it's going to help a lot in the long run. And if we can be more open to that and address our challenges and focus more on the development initially, I think it's going to be pretty valuable for the mental health.
Yeah. I mean, just the mental toll of education in general is massive.
Yep.
But I think that there's a lot of reimagining for that system that needs to be taking place. So yeah, but we don't need to dive into that either.
No. Well, how many 40-year-olds still don't know what they want to do? So it's
there's a lot. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I think there's a transition too when you look at the I guess career pathing. I mean, at this point you can kind of do and be whatever you want. And the world is, with the internet and social media, you can go as far as you want or stay as close to home as you want. So I think there's a lot of options out there, but
Yeah.
it's all kind of a transition, I think, with time.
For sure. And everything's evolving and changing and
100%.
yeah, which makes it even more difficult and honestly a little bit more uncertain and
That's true. That's true.
poses risks in and of itself.
I agree.
Yeah. Kind of shifting gears here a little bit away from like the suicide risks and support structures and the economic instability. I want to hear a little bit more for our listeners that maybe don't know. Obviously, if they're listening to the show, they're familiar with Lost and Found, but maybe they're not familiar with Survivors Joining for Hope and the work that you all do. Could you maybe paint us a brief picture of the work that you all have been doing for the last couple of years? I know you did a little bit in your introduction, but dive a little bit further into that.
Yeah.
And specifically the economic assistance that you do provide.
Yep. So, I mean, the economic assistance was our first goal. We just wanted to help families financially find the funding necessary to cover, because we wanted them to be able to focus on their grief. We didn't want them to worry about the financial kind of where the money's going to come from for their family member they lost. So initially that was where we started. We just simply wanted to provide assistance for burial assistance, grief counseling, funeral costs. And that just kind of snowballed from there. We grew and we slowly added on additional programming, providing on the youth support groups. Our biggest thing was our peer-to-peer connection. We were always positioned ourselves as, we weren't a professional counselor. We were not a licensed organization. Our programs were peer-to-peer. So we connected individuals with family, or individuals to people that had shared a similar loss. And I think it's important when you lose someone by suicide, it's challenging. If they haven't experienced it, you sometimes get that step backwards. And we wanted them to have someone immediately to connect with. And so if they lost a brother, we tried to connect them with someone that lost a brother. If they lost a child, we tried to connect them with someone that lost a child. And that was kind of our next step beyond the economic assistance, to give them some sort of or emotional support that was able to help them immediately. And I think that was by far probably one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most challenging pieces of the program.
I can imagine, yeah.
Again, it's peer-led, so none of us are professionals. We're meeting with families and sharing our experiences and our stories, so we had to make sure that we were safe in our own grief process, and that created some interesting processes. And the nice thing is with the economic program and adding on the peer-to-peer, that recognition kind of grew in the community, and that increased our funding. So then we were able to give families more financial support. And initially we started off with we were maybe giving families $1,000 of economic assistance, and then by year 6 and 7 we were up to maybe $5,000 to $8,000 covering full funeral costs sometimes in some situations. And I think
amazing.
it was big for us. And that was at this point I think we're approaching that kind of, I think it was $100,000 mark as far as total rewards given out for individuals on almost an annual basis. And it was pretty interesting to see where things kind of evolved and came from. So I think it's going to continue to evolve. And I think the economic assistance, with it being focused on funeral and grief, it started to expand, because you'd be surprised. One of the more unique things I think to discuss was we had to pivot sometimes. We would think we were going to help families with grief counseling or funeral expenses. And we had a situation where a family's refrigerator went out. They had 6 kids, and all of a sudden the food in the home, the main income passes away, and there's no longer food for the family. So we pivoted and helped them emotionally, help them find that refrigerator. And Carl's TV and Appliances did a great job with that scenario. They got it out there in less than 8 hours. It was fantastic. Awesome. So they had that, and even further with that kind of that legacy that. As you kind of do estate planning, and sometimes we help families financially there just to find a way to kind of evenly give things out. Money can be challenging if there is life insurance involved. When you try to help a family out, it can sometimes rip families apart. So we had to be a little careful with how the economic, support was being given. So there's a lot of different ways and factors we had to approach it from. But at the end of the day, it was just, it was rewarding, kind of helping families and being able to give that to them, and expecting nothing in return, just simply helping them and hoping they can focus on their grief long term was our big focus. And that's only continued to grow. And I think as we continue, we service the whole state of South Dakota. All funding was coming from South Dakota, so we kept it in-house. So we'll see where it goes now, though, with the new partner, with a new acquisition going on.
I love that. That's exciting. I really love the fact that you shared this piece about the refrigerator going out, because someone once told me through my grief and my loss, they had also lost someone themselves, and so they'd shared with me this really sweet sentiment that I have always kind of latched onto. You can help me financially, you can help me make meals, you bring meals to me, you can help me with whatever, and that's all sweet and fine. But the thing that makes the smallest, or that seems the smallest but makes the biggest impact, is those little things, like when a refrigerator goes out, or when I haven't done laundry in 3 weeks because I can't get myself out of bed, or I just need my dishes done, or those little things that you don't think of, but they mean the most. And I've always thought about that. And so now when I'm working, and especially now in this world, I have met so many cool people who have experienced great losses, and the thing that I want to do for them is just, let me take your children for the day so you can have some time to focus on yourself, or focus on the needs that you have financially or emotionally or whatever. Let me come over and I'll do your dishes, or I'll mow your lawn, that sort of stuff. It means something. So
I agree.
This sentiment that you just shared, I think, is really powerful.
Yeah. A lot of times it goes beyond financial. The financial piece was great, but we saw the most interaction with the people we helped when it was more around kind of the non-financial support. I mean, that's where we built our relationships, and
that's exactly where you build the relationships. So, absolutely. Yeah. I just love that. I had to share because I thought it was just
it lines up well.
Hit home with me. So I'm really excited for this partnership. I think the work that you're doing is so cool, and
Thank you.
it aligns with our mission with Lost and Found. And I think, again, it hits personally, and so it adds another layer of things. But thanks so much for sharing, the work that you're doing for our listeners who might not know.
Yep.
I hope that they will, get to know your work very soon and very quickly, because you're now part of us. And so
I am.
we're
That's
excited.
true.
We're
We are.
excited. So moving on, I know we're short on time here, but I want to wrap things up here with a couple of final questions. One being, what final thoughts do you have as far as anything that relates to suicide prevention, postvention, financial assistance, economic supports, risk factors?
Yep.
The list goes on and on. What final thoughts do you have that, maybe stand out to you that maybe people don't know, a layperson who's not familiar, or, just something that is exciting or very challenging for you? I don't know. What final thoughts do you have that are the things that you could share with our listeners?
Sure. I mean, I think suicide as a whole, is progressing, and mental health, just suicide and mental health itself is progressing forward. And I think we need to be more open-minded. And I think if we can bring people together and kind of bring down some of our walls, I think over the last, specifically over the last 3 years, it's been challenging. We've seen, I mean, you brought them all up, the racial challenges, the pandemic, economic challenges. I think that, as we kind of approach this in the future, I think the more we can work together and collaboratively approach mental health as a group, I think the more effective we can be. I think it's, I specifically go towards the male kind of generation, or the male perspective, where we constantly say we're fine, but we're not fine.
Yeah.
I think as males, we need to learn to open up a little bit more and have a more detailed conversation. And I think when we say we're fine, there's a lot of times that we're not. And I think the best way to approach that is just asking someone. I think oftentimes we're afraid to ask. We let it go in passing. We don't have the conversation. And I think if we can open up the conversation, when someone says they're fine, ask them if they're really fine. Tell them you're happy to listen, and don't shut the door on them, and give them a resource and an outlet. Because I think when it comes to suicide prevention, it starts with conversation and emotional support.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you run into another survivor of suicide loss, I think just listen. Don't, a lot of people want to step backwards. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but sometimes we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness. To move forward, and sometimes it's, I tell my son all the time that the things that are scary to you are because you don't necessarily understand them or you haven't experienced them. But when you go through and you experience them, it gives you a new perspective. So being able to understand the perspectives and have that conversation are just invaluable, I think. And
Absolutely.
Coming together is going to be very important, especially with the Lost and Found and survivors. We're coming together as an organization to make a bigger impact. So I think the more that we can come together as a community, the more impact we'll have on improving mental wellness and mental health.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, why I got into this work is because I understand this pain that I don't ever want someone else to understand. And if the one thing that I do can make an impact, so you don't have to feel the way that I have felt, I'm doing my job. And that's why I've shifted into this space. And so I think that's what we're going to be doing together. And
Absolutely.
We're going to bring everyone into the fold with us. So
whether they like it or not.
I love it. Well, closing things out here, do you have any books, podcasts, movies, things that you could recommend to our listeners if they want to learn more? Obviously, plug your website. Your podcast, whatever else that you might have. But is there anything that you, resources that you would send to listeners who want to learn more?
Yep. I think just going to our website, survivorsjourneyforhope.org, will give you plenty of resources as far as the support that we provide. It'll give you access to, there's videos out there when it comes to mental wellness, mental health. Check out our podcast, Society Rewire. We kind of talk openly and honestly about mental health and different careers, because I think as you look at, we talked about it just earlier, different careers, being a 911 operator, having a child go through cancer and what that does to you from a mental health perspective. There's lots of different conversations that we have on that podcast that people don't often think about. So it brings new perspective to just what it means to deal with mental health from a variety of different angles. So I think checking out our podcast is a great place to find resources. And, I think obviously your guys' website's a fantastic, I'm going to mess it up. Is it Resilience?
Today.
Thank you.
.org.
ResilientToday.org is a fantastic
the first
website.
piece.
I know. I was questioning myself for a second there, but that's, a fantastic way to find additional resources too. So, and if you don't know, just reach out. I think both our websites have ways to get in touch with us and, get a hold of us. And, if we don't have a resource, we'll help you find one. So I think that's key.
Definitely. Well, thanks again so much for sharing your story and sharing your work. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, being on today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review Great Minds wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more information about Lost and Found, go to resilienttoday.org. That's ResilientToday.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube @Resilient Today. Until next time, do more and stay well.